You know what I love about mental health disorders? The fact that it's always buy one, get seven free. Okay, full disclosure, that's not an original thought. It comes from this Tumblr meme that I saw years ago, and that speaks to my very soul. If you've watched a few of my videos, you might know me by now as Anna, the girl with OCD. But I am more than my diagnosis, okay? I am a complex, multifaceted being who is actually 3 diagnoses in a trench coat. So yeah, you could say that OCD is my main squeeze, but I also have the occasional flirtation with depression, and that's what I wanted to talk about today, the comorbidity between OCD and depression. So if you're new to the world of mental illnesses in general, comorbidity might sound like a very scary word because it can already be pretty daunting to be diagnosed with one mental illness. So what does it mean to be diagnosed with a second disorder or a third one or a fourth one? When I first got diagnosed with depression, it was shortly after my OCD diagnosis, and it made me feel so bad about myself. Like, oh my god, I'm not just regular crazy, I'm advanced crazy. So if you're in this stage right now, please try to take a deep breath and stay calm, because comorbidity is actually very, very common. So once you have one mental health disorder, you're more than likely to qualify for a second one. In fact, I think my record so far is 4. So OCD can be comorbid with a bunch of stuff, and among the most common comorbidities of OCD is depression. That might be because depression in general is very, very common. I've had at least 3 different therapists refer to it as the common cold of mental health disorders. And if you look at Gen Z and millennial memes, it might be easy to think that, oh, everyone's depressed these days. Which first, okay, boomer. And second, yeah, people talk about depression more these days, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has a good grasp of what depression actually is. So let's have a little bit of a refresher. Depression is a mood disorder, which means that it's often going to be experienced in phases instead of continuously. And that also means that most everyone is gonna be likely to experience depression at least one point in their life. Of course, there are some forms of depression that are more chronic than others. There are so many different types of depression, and they include major depression, seasonal affective disorder, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, psychotic depression, but the one that most people mean when they talk about depression is MDD, which stands for major depressive disorder. Now, there are 2 cardinal symptoms of MDD. The first one is a sad, persistent low mood, and the second one is the absence of motivation or pleasure, and that's known as anhedonia, which I think is a very pretty word to describe something that's not pretty at all. Other symptoms of depression can include feelings of worthlessness, fatigue, inability to concentrate, and also, how do I say this in a YouTube-friendly way? Thoughts of unaliving yourself. And what's fun about depression is, well, not much. Not much is fun about depression. But what's intriguing about it is that its symptoms can often be either one thing or its exact opposite. So depression can make you gain weight suddenly, but it can also make you lose a lot of weight suddenly. It can give you insomnia or hypersomnia. It can make you feel physically restless or have no physical energy at all. And out of all these symptoms, you need to have at least one of the 2 cardinal symptoms I mentioned, and at least 5 of the other listed symptoms. If you're confused right now, I know. It's very confusing, and it can sometimes feel like a screwed up multiple choice question, where, it's option A, answer B, option B, answer C, option C, answer A, option D, none of the above, option E, all of the above. Oh, and these symptoms must last for at least 2 weeks for you to qualify for a diagnosis. Now, what this variety in depression symptoms means is that depression can look very, very different from one person to another. And I think that's also part of what makes it so deeply personal and so deeply isolating as an experience. You could be depressed and all of your friends could be depressed at the same time, and that could still look very different amongst all of you. The manifestation of depression can look very different depending on factors like your age, your gender, your social cultural background. When I was first diagnosed with depression, I was 14 years old, and I remember just being very angry all the time, throwing a lot of temper tantrums, refusing to go to school, and becoming just very cynical about most things in life. So basically, I turned into a complete teenage edgelord. Now, fast forward to my 20s, when I get depressed, my symptoms are geared a lot more towards sadness, hopelessness, and self-pity. It feels like every thought I have about myself is negative, like everything bad that happened to me in my life was my fault, and that everything I try to do is gonna be ridiculous and a failure because I am ridiculous and a failure. So that's what depression is. But how is it related to OCD, and how and why does that comorbidity happen? Now, what's important to know is that when someone presents with comorbid OCD and depression, OCD is usually known as the primary diagnosis and depression as the secondary diagnosis. What this means is that mental health professionals usually assume that your depression was at least partly caused by your OCD. And that makes sense because, according to research, depression can often be caused or exacerbated by stressful life events. And guess what? OCD is super stressful to deal with. To better understand this, we have to talk about something called resilience. And that's the mental and emotional resources we have that help us cope with adversity. The therapist and YouTuber Katie Morton refers to resilience as poker chips that we have. My therapist has talked about it in terms of things that fill your cup instead of emptying it. Personally, I like to think of resilience as this protective blanket around your brain. If your brain was the earth, resilience would be the ozone layer around it. Does that make sense? And like all resources, resilience is not infinite. So things like trauma and daily life stressors will chip away at it and make that layer thinner and thinner. And the thinner it gets, the more vulnerable you are to developing conditions like depression. And OCD does exactly that. It acts like this battering ram against the ozone layer of your resilience. Is my metaphor still holding up? Because I kind of feel like it's falling apart. Another part of it all is the feeling of not being able to control anything that's happening. Depression thrives on that feeling of lack of control, and OCD is very good at giving you that feeling because it's hard to feel in control of anything when you're being jump scared by your own brain with images that you wouldn't see in the most hardcore horror movies. At my worst, my intrusive thoughts have felt like there's this big metal boot that's constantly kicking me in the head, being like, you're the worst, you're a dangerous person, you're the worst, until I'm like, okay, I get it, I'm the worst, I agree, okay. Now do you think you can give me a little break?
No.
So I remember learning about this study done by a guy named Seligman with some dogs. And what he did was he put these dogs in electrified cages, and every once in a while he would give the dogs a shock. And at first the dogs got surprised and they'd run around to try to avoid or escape the shocks. But then once they realized that they couldn't really avoid it, they just sort of laid down, became really lethargic, and stopped fighting back. Seligman called that learned helplessness, and he claimed that depression often develops as a result of learned helplessness, which is basically when you internalize the thought that you have no control over the bad things that happen to you, and you sort of just give up. Well, it turns out that giving up is not a great solution because, yeah, it makes you sort of numb to the bad stuff that happens, but more importantly than that, it makes you stop being able to enjoy the good things. That's probably the worst part of depression, at least in my experience. Like, your family, your friends, your own brain could be like, hey, do you want to do something fun? And depression will make you go, nah. Do you feel like doing any of the things you usually love to do? Do you feel like reading a good book? Do you feel like watching a movie? Do you feel like making a cake? Do you feel like going outside, even just for 10 minutes? Nope, 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 and double nope. Things seem boring before you've even started them, and nothing feels like it's worth the trouble of doing it. And that's an incredibly shitty place to be in, and what makes it extra scary is the thought that, what if this goes on forever? What if I'm just always this version of myself with all the personality and the soul sucked out of it, and I'm just this drab, colorless thing forever? But wait, there's more! If you have OCD, it gets even worse because depression is very good at taking away what is, in my experience, the most powerful coping mechanism there is against OCD: distraction. When my thoughts get really, really bad, the only thing I found that consistently works is distracting myself by becoming 100% absorbed in something else. Something I enjoy doing. It could be anything. It could be reading a good book, it could be watching a good movie, or writing, or making a cake, or doing a jigsaw puzzle, whatever. But it just has to absorb and take up all of my mental or physical energy. I've heard that some people like to talk back to their OCD thoughts and kind of rationalize with them, but in my experience, I found that that's a trap. My OCD is very good at arguing. I cannot out-argue it. If it had a job, it would probably be a lawyer. Objection! So instead, I have to distract myself with something fun. But when you have depression, nothing is fun. Nothing seems enjoyable. So there's nothing pulling me away in another direction. And I kind of have to stay stuck in this horrible place, in a mixture of my depressive thoughts and OCD thoughts, like some kind of disgusting, stagnant bathwater.
That's nasty.
So in this loop of OCD causing depression and depression potentially making OCD worse, it can be kind of hard to tell where one ends and where the other one begins. And you might ask, why does it even matter? If the end result is that I feel shitty anyway, why should I care what's causing what in my head? Different roads, same destination. And one of the answers to that question is that mental health professionals will definitely care about what's causing what and if something is depression or OCD, because diagnoses are kind of like medications in that they interact and interfere with each other. So a therapist is not gonna give you the same treatment if you have OCD versus if you have OCD and also depression. I don't really have any solutions or answers as usual. I just wanted to acknowledge that OCD and depression comorbidities are a real thing, they're a common thing, and they suck. So if you have OCD and depression, you have to know that you're not alone. You're not the only one dealing with this. I'm right there in the trenches with you, and hopefully that makes you feel better instead of worse. Do you also sometimes feel stuck in this loop where OCD makes you depressed, but then depression makes the OCD worse? Or maybe you feel like the two are completely unrelated. Either way, I'd love it if you could leave the answer in the comments and share your experience, because I'm always interested to know what other people with OCD are going through. I found that our experiences can be so similar, but also so different, and that's really part of what makes this disorder so freaking annoying, but also weirdly fascinating sometimes. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Bye.